Why hello you lovely little peppercorns, my name's Noa Lee, god of game criticism and lord of excellent taste, and Children of the Sun is an interesting sniping puzzle game tonally reminiscent of reality-bending classic Superhot, mechanically reminiscent of cult classic Killer 7, and just a damn good time. But while this game is no doubt excellent as a piece of entertainment, I question whether it reaches the heights of true artistic achievement that I'm looking for. Children of the Sun is the debut title of indie developer Renee Rother, and is one that sort of caught the attention of the mainstream gaming public a couple of months ago when its reveal trailer first hit the internet. You play as the Girl, a former member of a cult of Christian hippie mountain folk who now seeks revenge against their leader for the death of your mentor. The game takes place in and around a small mountain town where the cult, named Children of the Sun, has all but taken over, with each level acting as one in a series of locations the cult is now occupying, with each subsequent level taking you closer and closer to their headquarters where your ultimate target will most likely be found. Each level follows a similar pattern of you first scouting out the area from a distance to locate and mark all of the cult members in the area, with your ultimate goal being to find a route for your bullet to take to dispatch all of your enemies in a single shot. However, you're no ordinary girl, as something about your time spent with this cult has awakened in you telekinetic powers that give you minimal control over your bullet once fired, most notably the ability to completely re-aim and re-fire your magic bullet upon hitting a target, with failure occurring only if you hit an obstacle or whiz a bullet off into the distance. Though there are a few extra techniques and abilities at your disposal which can make carrying out your gruesome task a little easier. One of these is the ability to shoot certain inanimate objects such as exploding barrels and the gas tanks of cars, which, in addition to causing an explosion that can take out a group of enemies in a single shot, can also be used to reposition your bullet to a more favorable vantage point from which to fire once again. You can also use the same tactic to shoot a bird or a fish to reposition as well, giving you a plethora of options with how you want to go about tackling a given level. However, it's the abilities that you unlock as the game progresses that really spice things up, such as making minor tweaks to your bullet's trajectory mid-flight to delicately weave through obstacles such as open windows or even bend your shots around corners. Later on, you'll also get an ability that allows you to hit enemies in certain glowing weak spots. If you manage to hit 2 enemies in these weak points, you'll be able to fully re-aim your bullet mid-flight, with you able to bank up to 3 charges of this ability for you to utilize as you see fit. Another ability allows you to hold down the fire button mid-flight to increase the speed of your bullet, which can not only be used to reduce the downtime in between lengthy shots, but also gives your bullet armor-piercing abilities that are needed to take out certain enemies who wear body armor. These abilities add a lot of much-needed depth to the core gameplay and are introduced at just the right moment in the game's progression, right as your current abilities start to get a bit stale. As the game goes on, some enemies will start carrying riot shields that make it so you can only hit them from certain angles. They'll start driving around and drifting vehicles in order to create fast-moving targets. Armored enemies will force you to make sure you're far enough away from them before firing to ensure that you have enough time to build your bullet up to full speed before hitting them, while later enemies like these floating barrier dudes will force you to break their shield temporarily by firing into their deflection radius and then coming back to the enemy before they can bring the shield back up. This, combined with the game's excellent level design, can make finding all the enemies and taking them out a lot trickier and much more interesting than the simple fancy shooting gallery this game so easily could have been, if not for the careful consideration of its developer to craft a unique puzzle experience that requires careful planning and thoughtful action. The levels and their overall structure/design are also quite a bit different than what you would find in most games, as prior to firing, you're only able to move left and right along a set path to rotate around the stage, with some levels only giving you a small sliver from which to do your plotting and shooting, while others allow you to fully circumscribe the level if you so choose, and in a manner that's straight out of Killer 7, though that's about where the similarities end. Because the levels often feature a lot of buildings, brush and foliage as obstacles, as well as little nooks and crannies for your enemies to hide in, finding all of your soon-to-be victims can be easier said than done, with you occasionally having to let loose a sacrificial shot or two to do some pre-execution reconnaissance. This aspect of the game is excellent, as I found having to hunt and seek my prey prior to taking a shot to be more than enjoyable, as the game is careful not to just place enemies willy-nilly, but actually put them in thoughtful locations that make sense based on what the set dressing of a given level happens to be at that moment in time. For example, one level takes place in a rural gas station and has your foes placed in logical locations such as in cars, or filling up by standing at the pump, or even in the back seemingly changing a tire, while there are patrols wandering the perimeter keeping an eye out for, well, you, with potentially a commanding officer of sorts inside mulling over a map. Even though the overarching goal of every level is the same, the stories that are told simply through the set dressing, level design, and what your victims happen to be doing really goes a long way towards spicing up what is essentially just an excuse to hop a bullet from from enemy to enemy, and in a way that builds upon the game's insidious world, as well as what the titular cult happens to be up to in a given location. Furthermore, these moments actually give a bit of personality to the cookie-cutter people that you're about to kill, making it all the more sinister and impactful when you finally do. Now, the game never actually humanizes your victims enough for you to question the act of killing them, as it's made very clear early on that the Children of the Sun are a militarized group of extremists that would gladly kill you and anyone who opposed them without a second thought if given the opportunity, but I appreciate the subtle way in which the game reminds you that even though these people are the worst, they're still human, and that many of them are probably just as innocent as you are, but brainwashed into an ideology that has corrupted them and used them as a tool for its nefarious purposes. I like it. Of course, I would be remiss not to mention the look of this game, as it's probably the most striking aspect overall, at least upon a first glance. Children of the Sun isn't the most graphically impressive game around, but what it lacks in technical chops, it more than makes up for with its heavy stylization, excellent use of color, and visual and sound effects that work together to bring it all to life. Each shot is accentuated by the distorted rush of air, droning synth scales that indicate your bullet's acceleration, and crashing drum hits to let you know that you've made contact and got a kill, while your footsteps are underlined by a punchy rhythmic tone that increases in tempo as you move about to find a better shot. There isn't really a soundtrack here, no music in the traditional sense, yet every action in the game is accompanied by some combination of rhythm and dark synth noises that make it all feel alive and fleshed out, and I commend the developer for having enough confidence in their project not to shoehorn in unnecessary musical tracks, as a lot of indie developers often feel the need to do. Music very much isn't needed here, and very much would have distracted from the rest of the game had it been present. So if you're wondering why I've been using the Killer 7 soundtrack as background music throughout this video, that's why. But it's the way in which the sound design and the graphics come together that really makes Children of the Sun's art direction shine. Aesthetically, the game opts for a dark yet colorful palette made up primarily of purples and dark blues with hints of pinks and oranges thrown in as accents, while light fixtures as well as the cultists in which you are dispatching are always bright yellow. Part of this design choice is a practical one, as it ensures that all your targets have enough contrast to stand out from the dark and often dimly lit environment, but this bright yellow affect also alludes to the sun theme of the cult itself. The fact that the character you play as thrives and skulks about in the shadows, blending in with the environment as any good sniper should, gives the game a striking tonal contrast. Dark, cool tones are good and safe, bright and yellow is evil and dangerous. This further muddies the waters about this already morally gray setup, as bright, happy colors are often associated with goodness, while dark and moody colors are often associated with evil, yet in this game it's reversed, calling into question whether or not you're playing as a righteous vigilante or simply a psychopath murdering an innocent group of people who only appear evil from your twisted perspective. Flashes of your distorted past that take place in cutscenes, internal dialogue that appears to be your subconscious thoughts, as well as strange text that appears to say something innocuous upon a first glance, but changes and twists into something sinister if you look at it long enough, all cast further doubt on the reliability of our narrator. All this comes together to create quite the engaging, if a bit short, puzzle experience like no other, and one whose puzzles have a multitude of solutions that, combined with the game's scoring system, means that there are no wrong answers as long as all of your foes are dispatched, though some routes and executions are certainly better than others. As you play, you're scored on how quick and efficient your route through a stage happens to be, in addition to other factors such as whether you've completed that level's hinted challenge, more on this in a bit, which body parts you happen to hit on each of your victims, how many people you took out in a single shot via an explosion or the like, and most importantly, if you're able to fire quickly enough in between kills to maintain the score multiplier that really racks up your score's digits to climb the game's online leaderboards. You know, if you care about that sort of thing. And this is what I would consider to be the game's biggest flaw, at least mechanically, in that it relies far too much on the perceived desires of the player to want to get a better time and a higher score to carry a lot of its replayability, a setup that will be fine for a handful of dedicated players, but for the vast majority will most likely be ignored in favor of rushing through the game and moving on to something else before really getting a sense of what makes this game so special. The scoring system is unfortunately about the only real gameplay hook for those wanting to replay, as its puzzle-based nature means that once you've figured out a solution, there's little reason to do it again outside of a curiosity to find out other solutions or streamline the execution of the solution you've already found, or leverage the game's multiplier system to try and climb the leaderboards. Again, if you care about that sort of thing. I've said it once and I'll say it again, no one cares about playing for high scores these days, at least in general. The only people that will ever care about this sort of thing are those who are already so invested in their own desire to get better and dig deep with their own performance that the score merely becomes a superfluous bonus this to their increasingly deep understanding of the game. I.e., the people that play for a high score are the same people who would be streamlining and tweaking their skills anyway, to the point that a scoring system and a leaderboard is basically irrelevant. I would have much rather the game utilize this scoring system for something else rather than just a leaderboard, such as by giving each level a bronze, silver, or gold rating for the player to overcome, more challenges to complete that act more as collectibles rather than just achievements, and as a way to further increase your score as they do now, which could force you to find alternate and even less efficient routes through each level in order to complete them, adding yet another layer of puzzly goodness, or even a very well hidden secret collectible hidden throughout each level that unlocks some item of lore or concept art or something like that further fleshes out this world. It's not much, but it would have gone a long way towards keeping more people invested in the game. This is all stuff that could be added in future patches or DLC, and I'd be very surprised if something like this never happened, but it does seem a little strange that the game doesn't have anything like this on day one. It wouldn't have solved the game's artistic issues, but it would have made it a lot more fleshed out and a deeper experience as a piece of entertainment. Wait a minute, artistic issues, I hear some of you saying. Noah, are you on this whole jag about video games being art once again? Don't you know that they're just supposed to be fun and judged by how well they manage to distract me from my shitty postmodern life? Why yes, I am on this jag once again, because I, yet again, find myself at a bit of a crossroads, because while Children of the Sun is a very enjoyable game with a unique puzzle mechanic, and it deserves all the praise and attention it's getting because of that, it also needs to be called out for half-assing it in the artistic department. Now, I'm going to try and be careful with my wording here, because this is the part in the video where the plebs in the crowd who expect yet another generic video game review start dropping like flies, because I asked them to actually turn their brains on for a moment and think beyond the concept of fun into the realm of artistic engagement. But for those higher souls among you who are left and care about video games as more than just mere entertainment, let's get in the weeds a bit, shall we? Beyond its mechanics, Children of the Sun functions primarily as a vehicle to explore some very dark subject matter, namely cults and serial killers, but also the psychosexual realities of both the act of murder and revenge. It's not a happy tale, this one. It's clear that developer Renee Rother was interested in exploring these topics not only through the game's theming, but mechanically as well, yet I feel that he plays it just a bit too safe when touching upon these subjects for fear of being too controversial, or maybe just out of a fear of thinking too deeply about these subjects and what going too far into these waters would say about them as a person, which unfortunately causes a lot of Children of the Sun's dark themes to fall a bit flat. I haven't read or watched a single review or critique for this game because that's not something I ever do, my opinions are my own, yet I've seen plenty of headlines and threads of people commenting on how twisted this game is or how dark its subject material is, and I have to wonder, are we playing the same game? I don't deny that these themes are present, but they're really tame and sort of inconsequential to the entirety of the project, almost laughably so in a way, which to me detracts from what is otherwise an excellent little game. Here's the thing, at its core, Children of the Sun is a mechanical exploration that asks the question, what if you could redirect a bullet after firing it? And everything else that the game stems directly from that one question, with the mechanics that the game so carefully crafts and the level design needed to give purpose and meaning to those mechanics all flowing from that one central question. This is why, to me, the game's closest cousin isn't Killer 7, as a first glance may lead one to believe, but Superhot, as that game's premise is based on a very similar question, namely, what if time only moved when you did? Superhot, like Children of the Sun, has the entirety of its gameplay derived from its one central question. Though the two games are wildly different mechanically, the central themes of being a one-man, or in this case a one-girl army, going up against hordes of enemies armed only with your reality-bending powers, feel cut from the same cloth and are brought to life by that unique Unity Engine feel that exudes an air of indie gravitas. However, Superhot's lore and themes exist in the background for observant players to find, while in Children of the Sun they're front and center, yet the game isn't brave enough to thoroughly explore these themes, instead using them as a mere backdrop for the mechanics of the game. Basically, what I'm getting at here is that you could strip away all of the cult theming, the serial killer imagery, and questions about mental health and disturbed sexual impulses, and it wouldn't affect the game in the slightest, and actually it might make it more impactful as a work of art since it doesn't blue ball the player into expecting a thoughtful exploration of dark themes, only to chicken out before anything meaningful is achieved. For example, there's a sort of mini-game early on where your character says something along the lines of, I just killed someone, and now I'm horny, and then you proceed to play a sort of Pac-Man clone mini-game that's clearly meant to act as an allegory for masturbation. Upon a first glance, this seems pretty risque, as it's the first indication we have that maybe the protagonist isn't just doing this out of revenge, maybe they get a kick out of murder, and that hunting down and killing their fellow fellow cult members began as an act of revenge, but has turned into something more for them, something depraved and even a little sexy. But just look at how silly this scene is. You're sitting on a toilet polishing a gun, which doesn't make much sense as you're playing as a young woman, unless you're supposed to be trans, but seeing as this isn't hinted anywhere else in the game, I'm going to say that's not the case. Yet mechanically, the tank controls and the rotational movements of the sprite you control in the Pac-Man minigame are very indicative of a female form of masturbation, and quite convincing at that, perfectly mirroring the sexual tension, release, and frustration of occasionally hitting the wrong spots and thinking the wrong thoughts before finally getting it right and ending in a climax of flashing lights and arcadey sounds. Mechanically, the exploration of this dark theme of masturbation after murder is very well done, but the theming isn't brave enough to reinforce this idea, instead undercutting it with mismatched visuals and a silliness that feels as though the developer didn't have the artistic balls to just let the scene speak for itself, kind of like a child making a joke and dismissing their own artwork to avoid potential criticism of their parents and peers. I'm not saying you need to make this pornographic in order for it to be effective, as showing the audience too much would undercut the impact just as much as not showing them enough. In fact, it probably would have been more effective if the protagonist just went into the bathroom stall and lingered there for a while with their pants around their ankles or something like that, or better yet, just keep the scene as is, but instead of having this forced symbolism with the whole gun polishing thing, why not just have her stick her hand down her pants while the minigame plays? Now that would have been impactful. That would have made people uncomfortable as a scene like this should. That would have reinforced the dark themes you so clearly wanted to explore. That would have been artfully done. Yet this seemed to be just a bit too disturbing for your delicate sensibilities, which makes me wonder why you set out to explore these dark themes at all if you just didn't have the guts to go any deeper than a surface level exploration. This isn't my take, but a cynical reading of this situation might lead one to believe that these dark themes were added in solely for marketing purposes. Again, that's not my read of the game, but I can see that conclusion being drawn based on how these themes are handled. And this unfortunately holds true for the whole game. It wants to explore the dark topic of potentially being a serial killer in the making by humanizing the cult members whom you dispatch with some careful level-based storytelling, yet it also goes out of its way to justify your actions by making the cult members just as bloodthirsty as you are, being unable to step outside of the realm of a revenge story. It wants to delve into the subject matter of a brainwashing cult demagogue and comment on how these people are victims of their glorious leader just as much as they are to you, the player, yet it portrays them all as a bunch of partying frat boys and backwoods militiamen, removing any level of sympathy the audience would need to have in order for this theme to hit home. The game wants to comment on the manifesting psychosis of our protagonists by showing us the warped reality seen through their eyes, hinting at their unreliability as a narrative lens, yet the cutscenes show us an outside, objective perspective that not so subtly tells us that what they're experiencing is actually real and that their quest for revenge is justified. This game, thematically, is nothing but a series of limp dick contradictions that never equate to anything meaningful or impactful out of a fear of going too far, but worst of all is that very little of this theming has any relevance to the mechanics of the game itself. With the exception of the level design, which was clearly inspired by the themes and storytelling of a given level scenario, there's little connection between the game thematically and mechanically, and it would have been just as enjoyable of an experience as a piece of entertainment if it had no theming whatsoever and was nothing more than a shooting gallery constructed of textureless polygonal shapes with no context or theming. Which is a shame, because the foundation for a truly impactful experience is certainly there, and I feel that if the developer were less timid about exploring the dark subject matter here on display and had the artistic bravery to tread deeper into the dark, murky waters of human nature, this game could have been something profound, but as it stands, it's merely another good game that drops the ball as a work of art. Overall, I did really like Children of the Sun. I had a lot of fun with it, but I'm looking for more than fun, and actually, I don't think a game like this should aim for fun at all, but instead should aim for engagement, as the dark themes at play here shouldn't be fun in the traditional sense. They should be horrifying, they should be disturbing, they should haunt me and keep me up at night, yet they should also provide an experience that I can't put down and can't look away from. But Children of the Sun doesn't do that. It plays it far too safe and never really rises above its initial twisted appearance. The game is certainly worth a playthrough, but most players aren't going to want to stick around for more than a playthrough, while those that really want to dive deep with this one are likely to hit the bottom sooner rather than later, as there's just not enough meat on the bones mechanically, thematically, or artistically for this to be anything more than an afternoon's worth of fun that will be quickly forgotten. And that sucks, because this so clearly could have been so much more. Renee Rother is clearly a talented developer and strikes me as the kind of person who has what it takes to one day move hearts and minds and even mountains with their art, yet they've got a long way left to go. Hopefully this is just a case of the timidity of a fledgling artist, and that their next project strives for and reaches the heights of artistic achievement that they're so clearly capable of. Children of the Sun is an enjoyable experience and certainly a breath of fresh air as far as puzzle games go, but it never really gripped me either. For all its style, charm, and the brutal realities of its supposedly twisted world, it falls flat, at least from an artistic standpoint. It was fun while it lasted, but I doubt I'll ever touch it again. I'm Noa Lee, god of game criticism, and thus have I spoken.